In the face of rapid urbanization and redevelopment and development, we tend to forget that cities are not just concrete jungles but actually thriving ecosystems. But while all of this development takes place, we also need to understand that there is a link and a big intersectionality between urban planning, between gender equality, and between design. Today on the I Heart Women podcast, I'm joined by two women who are doing their best to ensure that cities are smarter and safer so that women can thrive. Hello, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Hi, thank you for inviting.
Bhavna, what do you do?
I'm an urban practitioner, I'm a writer, I'm also a trained paralegal. I work with this organization called Community Design Agency, and we're a collective of architects, artists, urban planners, social workers, and our aim is to make marginalized spaces better in terms of infrastructure, in terms of social spaces, public spaces, so that everybody can feel safer and equitable in our cities.
And Vinita, I know that you've been a journalist and worked in the space of telecommunications with a big focus on the the developmental industry and social impact. So, what prompted you to, kind of also pivot into smart cities?
Yes, actually, it was on one of my visits to India. I wandered into an event at Bandra Kurla complex. That was years ago, and I heard the commissioner say something which really didn't sound right to me, and that was that the demand for green spaces comes from the elites. And then I said, no, that's not true, because the elites can go to Switzerland, they can, they have lovely, gated communities where they can get green spaces, but it's actually the poor who need greenery and need good public spaces. And because they are the ones who are often seen on the street, like delivering, being couriers or doing other people's, the rich people's work. So I think that started my journey. I was back in 2007. But it was really when I was asked to start Placemaking India that this really became a reality where I could actually, help in building a community. So I am a leader of a community startup called Placemaking India, which is made up of urbanists in different disciplines, including historian, heritage conservationists, social workers, and they all dedicated to public spaces. And yeah, I mean the role of women in creating those public spaces and feeling safe and feeling well-being in those public spaces is almost fundamental to what we try to advocate.
So, if I were to ask you, Bhavna, where we're currently sitting, and of course, please feel free to talk about other cities, but in Mumbai, in India, what's missing? Fundamentally, what's really missing when it comes to urban planning that kind of contributes to ensuring that cities are meant for women? Because quite honestly, once if I spoke to anybody about this podcast or what we were discussing, they'd be like, urban planning and architecture, like what's the role that it has to play in gender equality? So if you could just kind of highlight that.
So, what is missing is that we don't realize that urban planning is a very multidisciplinary subject. It is not just making flyovers or designing metros, and every decision that we make has an impact on women's life now, and we can decide whether that impact can be positive or negative. For example, what's other thing that's missing is that when we are making these urban planning decisions, we are not studying their impact on women, on marginalized communities, including trans people, and I would say not just women, but also disabled men. Right now, our cities are only for able bodies, upper caste men. They're also not for minority men, people who suffer from any kind of vulnerabilities. To give you a small example, how many times do you encounter a disabled person in public life? whether it's on railway stations or buses or bus stops, or when you and when you enter like these gated spaces, like let's say a mall or not, and where they say, oh, there is a ramp, we have these facilities. But what about the facilities that are required from a person to get from a community to that point, which are not there? You go down, like, just if you start noticing how footpaths are made, how roads are made, there, our focus has constantly been shifting towards a very car oriented city, and we keep forgetting that less than 10% of Mumbai's population are car owners. What about the other 90%? So I feel there needs to be a fundamental shift in how we want our cities to to um I'm like, for me, I think, what do we want an ordinary citizen, whether it's a male or a female, to feel in a city? Right now in Mumbai, you always, you're constantly want to improve your standard of living. You feel like, oh, I want to get a car. But that car is not just aspirational, because somebody feels that when I have a car, or if I have a better facility of this or that, they want to improve their own experience in the city.
Yes. Yes.
It's fundamentally comes down to that, because you don't want to toil away in a bus or in a rickshaw, because that makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I feel like we need to really think about how we increase the experience, the comfort level of the absolute marginalized people with needs, people with from economically weaker section, and ultimately I feel that will impact all the citizens in a city.
At an institutional level, Vinita, do you feel that there are countries in the world that actually take these things into consideration? Because, I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel that there is not really space at the moment in policy or in our institutions to actually make considerations for such things, even though they are so crucial. So, do you think that there are cities that, and have you worked with cities and governments that are particular about this?
The car centricness, the car sickness, as we call it, is a issue that almost every country talks about, and maybe it's a matter of degree, and we still have the opportunity, because the penetration of cars here, to stop, maybe stop the automotive mission. So instead of throwing out Amnesty International and BBC, maybe we should be throwing Volkswagen out of the country. Because I can remember a time, I grew up in the 60s in Pune, and I can remember a time when cycles were ridden by everybody, including women in saris. And when the signal, I remember this moment so powerfully in my mind, when the lights changed, there was a surge of cyclists, just like you have cars now. There was like multiple rows of cyclists. It looked like what you'd only see at a marathon now, like a cycling marathon. But women and men both cycled in the 60s. We had people cycling, and there were very few cars at the time. Obviously, due to aspirations of society, more people are opting for cars, and it's like a sign of status symbol. But I think we should make buses sexy. We need to make metros more people riding on metros, because even the Delhi metro, which is taken as exemplary, only 3% of the riders, commuters in Delhi take the metro. As to your question of other countries, it's a question that every country faces to some degree or the other. But I think the difference is that there are many more women in urban planning positions. The chief architect of Barcelona, the new chief architect, is a woman, and the deputy chief architect was a woman. And so we need to have more women, qualified women, in decision making positions in India, in urban planning, because at the moment, there's a new generation coming up of people who are like Bhavna, and others who are educated abroad, and who really have come back with a real passion to do things in India. So we need to have more women in positions. But mind you, there are still problems in Barcelona, where I live part of the year. Green walls are actually a security risk, because you don't know what on the other side, who's lurking on the other side. So that's actually, it is a public safety issue. It's a safety issue for women. So they're not completely free of, the same sorts of, controversies and issues we have here. It's a matter of degree.
I'm not in a position to comment about any other city but Bombay at the moment, or maybe a little bit of Delhi, because my experience and at this point my whatever I have witnessed is very limited, and it is within a very privileged setup. What is the problem with public transport in India, and specifically in Bombay? Because I feel like, I go to any other city and I feel almost crippled, because I feel like I can't use the public transport, and I am somebody that has been quite an avid local train rider for most of my life, but I do not feel like that in any other city. But even in Bombay, it takes a certain amount of grit and resilience to be able to ride that, which is why, like you were talking about, there is the aspiration to kind of rise up from it.
Exactly. To start with, I feel we don't have any body that is looking at transport together. I'll give an example of London. London has Transport for London, and that body looks at everything. So you're making decisions not just for one type of public transport, but you're making decisions, you're creating policies that is looking for Transport for London. So then you're looking at buses, tubes, trains, everything holistically. In Bombay, every mode of transport is governed by different bodies, and those bodies do not talk to each other.
Okay.
We have the locals, which are run by Western Railways.
And are there women in these bodies?
Very few. Very few.
And not at leadership making positions.
Yes.
Not at the table.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we have the best, which has been completely defunded, which is such a shame, because buses are the most feminized mode of transport. And why is that? Because when it comes to metros, when it comes to local trains, your last mile connectivity is always an issue, because you have to always get from one point to the other. And how and how women travel is that we make smaller trips. We don't travel like men. We don't navigate cities as men, because men are leaving their homes, they're going to their jobs, and they're coming back. As women, whether we like it or not, we have far more responsibilities. We have to buy groceries for our houses. We have to, a lot of times, I'm not saying men don't do it, but very few men do it as compared to women, which means that we require a lot more flexibility. Buses give you that flexibility, because it's very easier to make bus stops. It's very easier for the authorities to plant a bus stop, to create routes which are centric to women, and that don't happen because we are not looking at it holistically. Like I said, to give you an example of metro, now there is a new metro line coming which is parallel to our north, south, western Western Railway.
Yeah, correct.
And when we know that such a huge population of the country, of the city, travels to locals, we could have easily spent a fraction of that money into making that locals better, more accessible.
Give it a door.
Yeah, give it
One door, please.
a door, ramp, anything. But instead, transport has also become an aspiration, right? Why we want metros, like she rightly said, and this is something nobody talks about, that only 3% of travel trips are made by metros. And somebody did a study in Pune where the metro is coming, that even at its peak, even when the entire system of Pune metro is done, the buses will still carry more ridership. But the authorities said, you know what, we don't want to see these reports. Right now, every city wants a metro, so we have to give it.
For the optics, right?
For the
Because
optics,
it's like
yes.
It appears like it's a state of the art kind of.
Exactly. So when you are making decision in terms of what will look good or what will appeal better, your transport systems are always going to be
And is it
messy.
well priced?
No, absolutely
Public
not.
transport is not well priced.
No,
in India.
I think buses are, because in that 10, and even locals in Bombay thankfully are,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
for $400 you can travel for 6 months, which are but metros are not, because
It's not.
it's not, because the
One trip is like it's less than an auto ride.
Yes.
It's a little less than
Little
an
less
auto
than
ride. It's 20 rupees, and I mean, if I were to talk, if I would, that amount that I would cover in an auto would be 70 to 80 rupees.
exactly.
So the difference is not too much. So I think I would want to now figure out, or have you guys elaborate a little more on another trend that I'm seeing taking over like all cities, which is redevelopment. And I think now it is happening with a pace, like, or maybe I'm just more cognizant of it, where we're just seeing droves of settlements and communities just wiped out. I don't know whether that is signaling the gentrification of what's happening in Bombay, but what would be, Vinita, your sense of gated communities? Because I know as an English speaking upper caste privileged person, and cis identifying, I would say that, oh wow, it's really wonderful, my child has all the amenities, there is clean spaces for me to walk, and all of those things. But I really wonder what it actually means.
You're very right, because one of the things we concern ourselves with the Placemaking India is the spaces between the gated communities, because what happens to them and who takes care of them, and so we try to do that. But even with developments and gated communities, we must leave a portion of that as public spaces. Okay, we are not, the city is for everybody, including the rich and the employers. You could give access to the inner courtyards during the day to anybody, for anybody to come in and rest and relax. And there are so many people who rush around doing jobs for us. We take it for granted our food will be delivered and Swiggy will come and others. But these are people who are working very hard. What if we allowed them to come into our gated communities, our gardens, at least during the day? And that could be made could be made a voluntary thing, or and you can close the doors at night if that seems more safe. But I think that kind of publicly accessible private spaces are very important, and building in. I mean, BKC is a very Bandra Kurla complex is a very glaring example of something that actually the US and Europe are turning away from, which is these large office parks which are completely dead at night. So what's the possibility of introducing a night economy where people come from across the river, Methi River, and use the space, or even during the day, like make it more accessible to people to use and have more inclusive public spaces. So I don't have anything against development, because architects need jobs, and we must have nice spaces which are friction free, which are pleasant to look at and appropriate for our weather. It's not always appropriate, and the kind of materials used are not, but include an element of safe public spaces. Include some green spaces which are publicly accessible.
What does that mean for women's safety then, Bhavna?
I slightly disagree. I feel like that is not going to happen because the push has to be towards making places more publicly owned and access, because the moment places are privately owned, the people who are owning the spaces get to decide who gets access and who gets to keep out. So sometimes, maybe one person or one group of people who are privately owning might give access, but I don't think that will translate to policy that well. So I feel, and every community, every society, every neighborhood should have more public spaces, not just in terms of park, but in terms of museums, public libraries, swimming pools, sports complex, because these are the things that really, elevate the quality of life for marginalized people. The fact that you and I can sit here together and talk the way we are, because we were granted those, our parents were able to give us those services, we were able to access those. It's not so much a function of merit or talent as much as access. So I feel like public spaces which really look at increasing the quality of life and which are equitably distributed throughout the city. Right now you have, in terms of, let's say, public swimming pools, we have one in Dadar, there is one in Chembur, and it's so difficult to get any membership in those because, there's some 2,000 forms they release in a year. You have to stand in line at 6. I've tried to do all of that because so, and there are only 2-3 such spaces, and all in privileged neighborhoods. Let's say Govandi, where I live, people forget parks. Like, communities don't have toilets. No, forget communities. I was doing a project, this arts festival, and we were doing a lot of work with authorities to get permissions. So I was at the traffic police office in Govandi, and there were these 3 female traffic police officers, and we started chatting because at these places you tend to wait for them to clear your paperwork. And they said, "Oh, what do you do?" So I told them about what I do in terms of creating, equitable spaces, and they said, "Can you do something for us? Can you build a toilet for us?" These are government employees,
Law enforcement officers.
And they don't have access to like basic. So they either go back to their homes or they go back to like a nearby shop which has a toilet, but most of the time they don't because their jobs are so demanding. They can't leave their job.
I experienced this in Uttar Pradesh in a district collector's office who was a woman. I mean, she just kind of told me that I can use, her restroom, her washroom, and it was just not in a condition for me to use. And I was on my period, and it was horrific to say the least. So I cannot even imagine in a city like Bombay where their work is, it's not just sitting and like pushing papers out, right? It's like physical labor, and you need that space to relieve yourself and just work. Like,
Just basic, forget the things that I'm talking about, like libraries and sports center. Like, we haven't been able to have decent public toilets.
I still don't see decent public toilets
anywhere. Yes.
And this is like a very privileged locality.
And even in privileged localities, Sanjana, it really affects the marginalized women, the low-income women. You go, and I live in Khar, I was talking to female street vendors, and I just started chatting. I said, "What happens when you're on your periods? Like, where do you go?" I said, "We don't go. We just wait, or we sometimes wait somebody from our family member to come so that we can go back home, and their homes are also 3-4 kilometers away." So, and we have invisibilized so many of women who do not come from our social economic background, and that won't just change if with women in leadership positions.
Yeah.
Because you also have to see where women in leadership positions are also coming
Yeah.
from.
Because you are impacting the women who are trying to be in the workforce as well, right?
Yes.
Like even in like the labor participation. But I'm just going to press you further and just
I
sure,
just
go ahead.
wanted to clarify that it's not an issue of this or that, it's and. So
Yeah.
it's public access to privately owned spaces and development of communal public spaces in low income communities, because that also has to go on side by side. So, but you know, the pace of development, especially under this government, is never going to stop, which means the pouring of concrete and building of monumental,
Yeah.
you know, sort of private spaces and even public spaces. But there, it's a parallel process. So I don't think it's like this or that.
Yeah.
It's this and that.
Yeah.
You know? And on the issue of toilets, there's also the third gender issue, because a lot of people, there's the Social Design Collaborative in Delhi has found that the third gender finds it difficult to find public toilets because they are not allowed into men's toilets, and in women's toilets they are often bullied, like they may go into so there needs to be a safe space for them also to go to toilets, you know, and use toilets. But that's a very good point about there's a lot of basic issues which, you know, and you know, I mean, the way we are building toilets actually is quite dangerous right now, because it needs to be built correctly, or it's, you know, or things are, the groundwater is going to get contaminated. So this is almost has to be done on a military, you know, on a kind of a
War footing.
war footing, exactly. Maybe get some really special, you know, specialized people, because it's not a cottage industry. You can't leave it to the community to do it.
Yeah.
And it's there's a real risk of now with this explosion of shauchalayas, which sometimes come at the expense of, you know, compromising like public spaces, is actually you know, going to be a huge risk for the groundwater.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I actually wanted to address, I mean, the climate action part of it, because I feel like while there is, and I will call it indiscriminate, because I covered the RA metro issue very, very closely when I was working in the news, and I was very cognizant and privy to what the impact that it was having, you know, in terms of climate change, and the impact it would also have on the marginalized communities, and just kind of understanding the issue. And I could not fathom or wrap my head around the development argument, because I mean, where is the sustainability when we are talking about development? So do you see that there are other you know, such interventions, or that there are infrastructure frameworks? I mean, there are a dime a dozen in Bombay, but some things that really are not taking sustainability and hence the impact of that particular climate change on marginalized communities and women into consideration.
I think everything.
Everything, yeah, to like, you know, for lack of like diplomacy, like I think right now none of the initiatives we're taking are looking at either sustainability, or they're just doing lip service. There are a lot of these buzzwords now. Everything has a climate component attached to it, like in terms of how these projects are framed, how these projects are pitched. But if you look at the ground reality, nothing. Like, for example, if we were really serious about sustainability, we would never build the coastal road. Like, especially after the data from the sea-link, because the sea-link, for the capacity at which they said it would be used, it is currently being used only at 30% of that capacity. So those numbers were blown. That study has not been taken into account. And now, like 5 years ago, the project was at 12,000 crores. By the time it will build, who knows, like how many thousands of
impact.
Yeah. And like I said, less than 10% who are car owners. People who have cars also end up taking locals because of the time, because of the traffic in the city. So and that money, that fraction of that money could have really gone into making the city more accessible, more equitable, more equal for so many, because a lot of these things that we're talking about in terms of having more buses, having railway stations more accessible, building more public toilets, they don't require a lot of money. And BMC is one of the richest municipal corporations in the country. It's a matter of intent, because people who are making those decisions, they're sitting so far above the ground that they're not able to see the impact of these policies. Forget positive impact. I think they're pushing the city further behind in terms of livability. Like, if you're from Mumbai, like you would have said, like the standard of living in Mumbai 20 years ago would have been much higher. I mean, that's a qualitatively, yes. So to give you an example, BMC is the richest one of the richest municipal corporations in the country, and they have the money to implement a lot of these smaller initiatives, smaller regulations, smaller projects that will exponentially increase the quality of life for low income working women, for disabled people, for trans people. And so it's not a question of money, it's a question of intent. If you have the right intent, and how that intent will come up, and that intent has to be cultivated by talking about creating platforms where even the officers who are making their decisions can be informed about these things. They are taken to Shanghai to look at infrastructure, so their entire understanding of city infrastructure is very material, very visual. They don't concern themselves with the smaller, the softer details, and these are the smaller details that that defines how will you feel, whether you will feel good standing at a station, or you will feel like icky, that is like, oh my god, when can I save up more money and get a guard and just eject out of these ordeals. So I feel that needs to be cultivated. I think we need to have more forums, we need to have more platforms where citizens, urban planners, architects, everybody, general citizens, people like, somebody like you who necessarily are not into the sphere of urban planning, but you don't need experts to make a good city. That is a notion that I would like to challenge, whether it's through my work or writing, that it's not an expert. We don't need experts. We need to listen to ordinary people, and once we start listening, things are automatically going to start improving.
A lot of times we don't really consider or are able to understand the importance of a well-designed city and how it can contribute to not only making women feel safe, but also actually keeping them safe.
Sure. We were talking about the silo effect of transport, and so DMC will concern itself in Delhi only with, we have a whole carriage for women. Yes, that's true, because that's a great example of how transport design can bring about a change of behavior and attitude, because men immediately respect that. They'll come in very sort of carefully, like make sure they're not entering the women's compartment, because that's for women. They may stand there and look at the women's compartment, but they'll dare not come in, and certainly never grope. You haven't heard much of a complaint about groping of women on the metro. So certainly the transport design and service design, this is where a good example of how that can sort of ensure safety of women. But the more important part is that it's the last mile, because once they get off the metro station, getting home safely is not that self-evident, and this is where interventions are needed, such as probably women-driven three-wheelers or women-driven Ubers. Maybe a special line for women to get home safely, because often they have to rely on another male person to come and pick them up from the station. So anything that helps women feel like they're getting out into a safe and pleasant and familiar environment. So more shops, more shops open late at night. These kinds of things also help, and they're simple interventions which a lot of NGOs or others, could even entrepreneurs can get involved in.
Yeah.
So it's the last mile safety is the issue, because that belongs to another department, obviously, and they will not concern themselves with that. And another thing is asking women and having more consultations with women as to how they feel and where they feel safe or not. So Social Design Collaborative in Delhi has gone all around the country and with boards of the neighborhoods that women live in, and ask them to detail where do they feel, how do they walk to their place of work or to the metro or to the transport, and where do they feel safe, where do they not feel safe. So they put dots, red, green and yellow, as to
Nice.
where they feel safe. And so in involving women in discussions of this kind, under the bridge, under the flyover, wherever you can find them. And women actually use and walk more than men, because they have to do duties, as you said, running within the neighborhood. So the creation of 15-minute cities, as we call them, and that was invented by a professor in Sorbonne in Paris. And that's something we always had, actually, because you go within your neighborhood to do your shopping, to do your errands, but now you have to travel very far for work. So that may have been appropriate for the US, when they're building Silicon Valley and others, but even they have realized, like Airbnb employees, they would never work in Silicon Valley. They prefer to work in San Francisco because they can walk to work, they can take the metro to work.
Yeah.
And so even employees no longer would agree to work in a place like Silicon Valley. They prefer to work in downtown San Francisco. So we need to have more of a consciousness about these things when we plan cities. We're making the same mistakes all over again with these monumental, these sort of model cities where you have to travel. And even Gandhinagar, which is the capital of Gujarat, is an example of that, of very alienating environment where people it's a very car-friendly city, which is very removed from the community.
Yeah.
And we need to get away from master plans like these.
Yeah.
And that can only come as a groundswell from people to say that this doesn't suit this doesn't suit the climate. It's not helping the climate change. It sort of is a very regressive kind of policy now, because people now should be accessing their workplace and the other places that they need to go to by public transport or by walk, on foot, and they shouldn't have to take cars to do that, because you're going to get into an endless loop otherwise. So these monumental projects where there's a lot of procurement of cement and all the corruption that goes around that really have to stop, like the coastal road, as you mentioned, because these large infrastructural projects are the ones that make money, and they are the ones that are being pushed. But the social infrastructure is suffering, and the softer things, as you said, because there's hardware, software and orgware, and the orgware and software are equally important in planning the cities, making them safe for women and others, women, children. When you make safe, when you make a city for children, they say you're making it safe for everybody.
Absolutely.
So
So if I were to ask you like top 3 ways that Mumbai can change or be planned better, if I were to ask you just right off the bat, so that women are safer.
So, first of all, I think we need to change this thinking that safety is equal to surveillance. This
Yeah.
is such an
Yeah.
the moment anything happens to a woman in a certain place, let's put a CCTV.
Yeah.
So we're thinking, that is not going to prevent a crime. How many women go and report something that has happened? Because that entire process is so cumbersome, it's so dehumanizing. So, but that thinking comes from the fact that whenever something happens, our first question is, what was the woman doing there?
Yeah.
As women, we constantly have to justify why we are occupying.
That is my thought when I go running every single day. Not that let me enjoy my run, but it is that till the sun comes up, I'm constantly worried about if something happens to me, what is going to be my justification for running?
Exactly.
And it's me claiming a public space. I'm doing what I want, but this is a thought that plagues me, that if something happens to me, A, who's going to take care of my child? That's one. And B, what am I going to say? How am I going to defend myself?
And this has been like instilled in us, drilled into us from generations of like conditioning, media, culture, everything. Because, oh, this happened, she shouldn't have been out at that time or that day, and what was. We don't ask that question to men. You look at a chai tapri, men are just sitting there, claiming space. Nobody asks that. So I feel the next step we need to do is we need to make spaces where women feel comfortable claiming space without having to do anything, without having to justify, without having to work. We are constantly, you start noticing around if you're on a road, how many women are just claiming space without an objective. Very few. I don't know if we can even mark like one or two. They are either with their children, they are shopping, they are doing this chore and that chore, and that is where we have to change.
Which is why women who are standing, maybe smoking a cigarette, are so intimidating, right? To like a how dare you enjoy your life?
It unsettles people as to why is she there, what is she doing there.
Yeah.
So that needs to definitely change in all of us. I feel we need to stop asking that question, and we need to then think about, okay, how do we look at a space? If we look at a footpath, how do we create this so that a woman can sit and enjoy city life? That is how. And all kinds of women, pregnant women, disabled women, non-binary, trans people, everybody. And I think if we start thinking from that perspective, then everything will become easier.
Yeah.
So that I feel is extremely, extremely important. And also the other thing that we need to do is, which is at a policy level, is create more participatory forums. Today, I don't know if, they take away the footpath from your road. Do you know where to go and file a complaint? Do you know who to go? Or if you say that, okay, I don't have a park in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Do you know where to go and ask for that right? We don't know. We don't have these public forums where we can talk about city making as a citizen.
Yeah.
So I think, forget planning is...
And do we have those rights?
No, we don't.
We don't have.
We have those rights, but
Yeah.
it's so like all this information, it's obscure. You can get any information. All this information has to be about, how a footpath's made, how much money is spent by it. All has to be in public domain. But if you go on websites, it's so convoluted. You have to like go here and then here, then ask for this information, file this RTI. Yeah, so it is really, the system is designed for you to be discouraged from asking these questions. So I think that once we start listening, when we start creating forums where it's easier for people to voice their concerns, not just concerns, just like, okay, you have an idea, planners don't have the best ideas. Clearly, we can see that at the state of our cities.
Yeah.
anybody can have, you, me, anybody in this room can have an idea that can.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that that idea gets to the right table, gets discussed, gets out in the domain where people can know about it? And I think for me, these are the three things that I would want to change. And
What would you say are certain interventions that you thought were exemplary in terms of addressing, like kind of ticking all boxes when it came to gender equality, caste, or climate action, and examples of good urban planning?
You know, I guess from the transport side of things, definitely, reducing the fare for women or actually letting them ride free. I think that's a new idea which I'm really in favor of, because it gets more women to workplaces, gets more women out and able to enjoy their spaces. So I think, and the project that I mentioned about Social Design Collaborative, taking opinions from women, because we talk about data driven cities, smart cities, about data driven cities. That's not all from video walls and from lampposts and from surveillance, but it's about asking people at the level of at the ground level what they think about their city, what they would like to change. So we need more, and Placemaking India is actually going to be funding such initiatives. So when the master plan is created for the city, what about the micro plan? Who puts the micro into the master plan? And so there are a lot of people doing intervention at small level, small scale. They may not be publicized as much, but I'm really encouraged by what is going on in civil society right now in India towards the same.
I would like to talk about the project that I recently did. Not to blow my own trumpet, but that project is really close to all of our hearts. At Community Design Agency where we work, where we did an arts festival, a public arts festival called Govandi Arts Festival. It was located in Govandi, which is known as the ghetto of Mumbai, but it's also the place where the most working class population, it has a very high working class population living in that neighborhood. But it is also known to be as the place for crime and garbage. The dumping ground is situated there.
Yeah.
So the idea for us to create that public festival was to create a forum for not just concerns but a celebration. When you bring people together who can come in a space, and because whenever we talk about the issues of marginalized, we're constantly talking about concerns and issues and statistics that okay, they don't have this, they don't have that. But we wanted to flip it on the other side and say that okay, let's show them what communities can do when they're given a chance.
Yeah.
So that festival was very bottom up, created by the people. And it was and it's a Muslim neighborhood, and a lot of these communities have been displaced from different slums, different pavements. And when you talk to women, and we also did the similar safety exercise, and we did it with both men and women. And interestingly, what we found out, there was this one major public space in the center of the colony, and all the girls, young adolescent, young women we spoke, they marked that they felt the most unsafe there. And when we asked the boys and the young male, they felt the most safest there.
Wow.
And we put them against, talk to each other that, okay, now talk about this. So, that was sort of the initial seed of the festival, that how do we bring the community where everybody can feel safe. And it was so nice to see. There were middle-aged women who used to, because the festival used to have for 5 days happen in the evening. So we used to talk to these women who have children, who have responsibility, and they said, we finish all our work at 2, we cook for the entire day so that at 4 we can come here and enjoy the festival. So they were so unapologetically occupying space.
Yeah.
And for leisure.
For leisure.
Exactly. They're not there to do any work. They're not there for like a sabha or a meeting. They are just there to enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
So I feel like for me, it was to create a city of joy. I feel like that's what we should aim for.
Yeah.
That if joy is our highest value,
Yeah.
then everything we'll do, so we want to do, will sort of start getting impacted by that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. And here's to creating smarter, safer, better cities for women. Thank you.